Okay, welcome back. So I had the pleasure of introducing Norman for a second time today, and I forgive me, Norman, but I'm going to tell people not like what your titles are, but just a little bit of what I've experienced working with you over the couple of years. Norman is incredibly curious. He's like a Media Lab graduate student. I mean, he just loves exploring all these ideas. I find that amazing. We get a lot of really high-level people through the lab, presidents, CEOs. We had a king through here. But most high-level people, they don't listen very well. They actually just want to tell you what they think. And Norman really listens. I just love that. And he's always insightful and always has interesting things to say. And maybe more importantly, he's just fun to work with. So with that introduction, Norman, stage is yours.
Can I have a clicker? Great, thank you. Every year, I lead the Forum of Mayors from the United Nations in Geneva. And the idea is to encourage mayors from around the world, specifically the area of North America, Asia, and Europe, to share their experiences, to work together to learn from each other. And through that event last April, I was approached by the mayor of Kharkiv for help. And that led to a Zoom call, our first meeting. And in anticipation of that, I had the thought that maybe it was the start of bringing together a group of the best minds around the world to anticipate an involvement in that city. I knew nothing about the city other than I might find out from a Google search. And so, in anticipation of that, I brought for that first meeting with the mayor, the Zoom meeting, two economists who'd been part of a wider network in the foundation as mentors. Economists, Ed Glazer, Ian Goldin from Harvard University and Oxford, respectively, with a passionate interest in cities. Their writings, before I had the privilege of meeting them, were inspirational on the subject. And the mayor shared his vision for a master plan that would be about not just regeneration, not just building back the city as it was, but using it as an opportunity to improve the quality of the city. He specifically wanted me, as part of that venture, to be involved in a new building that would be about new technology, science-based. Perhaps it's much, much later after this first meeting that I discovered, in a way, how anticipatory his projection, his anticipation was. And in effect, it was creating the city of the future now. That was a great meeting. And at the end of the meeting, I picked up the phone and I phoned another individual who'd been hugely influential in the network of mentors for the foundation, workshops, bringing together young graduates. And that was Stuart Smith, who headed out Arabs in Berlin. I should perhaps explain for those who don't know that Ove Arup was somebody that I knew in the early years of my career, an inspirational figure who created a global enterprise of engineering with all the skills of transportation, sanitation, highways, traffic, and with the proximity of the Berlin office, and Stuart is a very, very sympathetic individual. And immediately I explained that we were doing this on a pro bono basis, that essentially our family was funding it. And I said, you know, would you enter into this in the same spirit? Eventually, hopefully, still to happen, hopefully coming closer will be international funding. But meanwhile, Arabs have, without hesitation, contributed totally to that venture. This is just a glimpse of the foundation and that network, because the mentors, leading figures in their field, have been, as I will hopefully show in the short time available, very, very influential in terms of the potential for the regeneration of Kharkiv. There's always a danger if you bring together the best minds globally, that locally, quite reasonably, the populace, the individuals, the architects will say, it's about us, we're here, we're local. So again, one of the challenges is how you combine the best of global knowledge with a local awareness. And hopefully I'll be able to demonstrate that the way that this project has moved forward has been a fusion of those two influences, but predominantly it is bottom-up in its approach. There's a popular misconception, I guess, that means it's going to be somehow diluted. Nothing could be further from the truth. The reality is that good things happen when everybody buys into them. And just to condense some of the activities between April and October, as we are now, there have been 80 working sessions, 800 people, questionnaires, more than 16,000 people have responded to those questionnaires. And each of those questionnaires would have something like 30 very, very important questions about how the citizens would see the future of their city, right down to the most intimate details of how they see the future of their own home, how they'd like to improve it. Obviously, in this environment, a lot of that has been with Zoom exchanges. But there's also been the venue of the headquarters of the foundation in Madrid, bringing together the different parties. So here is one working session, and without reading the fine print, if you do, you'll see that the United Nations are there, foundation members, representatives of the council, representatives of the Kharkiv architects. So coming together face to face as well as more remotely. A word about Kharkiv. It's the second city in Ukraine. It's 1.5 million people. It's an extraordinary combination of industry, culture, learning, a multiplicity of universities, and it's very, very close to the Russian border. Historically, if you go back in time, the city center was generated by the confluence of two rivers. Going back to its 17th century roots, this point here was the fortress, the historic core, which persists as the central core. Before I knew about Kharkiv, through the late Rainer Banham, an extraordinary critic of modern architecture, he compared this with the Van Nelle industrial complex in Holland as one of the iconic works of the constructivist movement 1920s. And that was in the background here. You can see it at the end of the river there. So an extraordinary combination of heritage buildings. And also, just to quantify some of the recent tragedies ongoing, the damage or destruction of 6,000 homes, more than 200 schools, almost 100 hospitals, offices, cultural buildings. The list is endless. There's a confluence, there's a convergence of desires here. Advocacy that might come from those of us who are more remote, rebuilding the destroyed heritage, statement of the architects group, a transport report from the past to improve the quality of public spaces, and the mayor of Kharkiv, who later in that process identified the potential for a monument to the war. So moving into a time of victory, a building that would freeze for future generations the memories of the conflict and would be a public building. And he said the Reichstag that you were responsible for with your team and the politicians in Berlin, that could be a model for that. And as a reminder here, this is the reborn Reichstag, was created to bring together, to reunify East and West Berlin after the fall of the wall. And it has this very real public dimension, attracts millions of visitors every year, second most visited, big symbol of reunited Germany, as well as a symbol of Berlin. But important perhaps to remember that this was the very symbol of the conflict of World War II, and appropriately identified as the potential for a Ukrainian version of that in the future, the regional headquarters on Freedom Square. And Freedom Square being the historic center of Kharkiv. And those rivers, perhaps in a long-standing urban tradition, become the generators for mobility, for communication post the river. So it's hardly surprising that you can see the way in which that influences the pattern of the road network and the rail network, and finally the metro. And so as we move through, we have all these exchanges, we're analyzing, we're trying to find trends, we're trying to find how you can build on the existing pattern and improve that pattern. So in commuting, the questionnaires, the analysis shows an extraordinary dominance of public transport. The red is the metro, the yellow is the public transport, tram, buses, trolleybuses. Very, very little cycling, hardly anything in the way of cycling, a lot of walking, and only 20% of the car use. So an extraordinarily good start. And how do you build on that? So what you really want to do at this point is to look at how you use the existing network of metro, of public transport, which might determine the location of certain key elements still to be generated, the science element, for example. And my colleague from the foundation, Diego, will be homing in on that shortly. But obviously the imperative here to improve the quality of spaces for walking and biking. And the rivers really give the clue to that. And very fortunately, those rivers have an abundance of nature on their banks. And that gives the clue for, and again, this is coming from a groundswell of opinion encouraged by Arabs, the Kharkiv architects, the local architects, to transform the riverbanks into a new network of green and blue corridors for pedestrians, for biking, to create a citywide network. And as we seek to find patterns, to find synergies, then we start to explore the possibility of those rivers developing that network. And that leads us, not surprisingly, as you'll see, to the the heritage of industry. Industry, like the example that I took earlier of Duisburg, was the very lifeblood of this city. But that comes with some very, very serious downsides. I mean, so much so that 20% of the area has been devoted to heavy industry and still has that imprint. But that industry is probably best mirrored in European terms by Airbus, not by your Boeing, the two giants of aviation. Boeing is autonomous, it's here in this country, it's self-sufficient. Airbus is dependent on a network of European countries which produce individual components. Engines will come from one country, the wings will come from another country, the fuselage, so on and so forth, and they're all assembled. The real downside here is that Ukraine was part of the Soviet bloc, so Antonov did not make aircraft. It made critical elements of aircraft. And that's the story, not just of aviation, it's the story of heavy industry. There are some exceptions, fortunately, but that's the pattern. And that leads to the serious examination, which the mayor anticipated in terms of saying, I see science at that very, very first meeting, the rebirth, the regeneration. But it's worth tracing that heritage because industry grew around the rivers. And then housing grew related to the industry. And at this point, I'm thinking because in that initial exchange with the mayor, more or less, I want you to re-examine the nature of industry. And I'd forgotten until recently putting together a monograph on our work. This is a drawing that I did, it must have been half a century ago, in the early 1970s at the request of a very influential magazine at that time, and a very influential figure, Cedric Price, Architectural Review, Industry of the Future. And you can see that there's a dominance of nature. And what I'm really saying at that point is that under one roof, in one building, you should have all the elements of leisure, of cafes, of galleries, of event spaces, heavy industry, light industry, not heavy industry, correction, light industry, but the servicing for that light industry. So in a way, that as a prototype, although it's single story and we'd be talking about a multi-story environment, is a model. Coming back to the questionnaires, are you satisfied with the quality of the house that you live in? As you can see, it's a very small proportion who in green are very satisfied or in blue satisfied. Are you satisfied with the neighborhood? A very high level of satisfaction. Everybody wants to go back to the neighborhood, but they have a lot of reservations about their home. So in the neighborhood, 2/3 are either satisfied or very satisfied. They believe that the quality of public space can improve, and hardly surprising, mindful of the nightmare that they're going through at the moment, they want bomb shelters in the future. And it's not that long ago that I can remember, and even the home that we live in has a nuclear fallout shelter. The Cold War is not that long ago. And bomb shelters were part of, in many countries, the code compliant. In other words, if you weren't providing it, you would not get the permission to build a building. So what was the ideal neighborhood? And this rather difficult to read kind of conglomeration of activities. The ideal neighborhood is one where you can walk from your home to the place of work, to a place to dine, a restaurant, easy walking distance of a school, of sports facilities, leisure facilities. And of course, as we heard earlier, that is one of the latest kind of results of the pandemic. The mayor of Paris, the advisors to the mayor, saying, as we all observed during the pandemic, the neighborhood suddenly became vibrant and alive. Locals were coming together. So this idea of the 15-minute city where everything was within 15 minutes of walking distance. I think it's an oversimplification of the city because the city is the city because it not only has neighborhoods, but it has the cultural focus, the commercial focus, the buzz of the city center. So it's progressive, it's desirable, it's only one part of a larger picture. It's also an important reminder that some cities, this is not new. London, for example, more than 90% of the Londoners are within 15 minutes walking distance of a high street. And the high street contains many of these ingredients. So in a way, and I'll come at the end of this and link the neighborhood back to master planning. But meanwhile, we look at the housing. The housing, the citizens, through this exchange of information, have said we're not happy with it. So if you look at it, 80% is Soviet-era prefabricated concrete multi-storing housing. There's nothing wrong with concrete, there's nothing wrong with prefabrication, but it has serious shortfalls. It's the product of a particular point in time. And it's not common just to Ukraine or Kharkiv. You could find this in any city in the world. You could, particularly in France, outskirts of Paris, you'll find it in London. It was one of those global phenomena. There were variations locally, but it was a broad influence. As we go into it, the reality is quite different from that image. 75% are owning their own apartments in those buildings. Half of them want better insulation for sound or thermal, and only a quarter are satisfied. How do you address that? How do you bring, at this point, global experience to a positive influence locally? Through our foundation network, we became aware of the work of Anne Lacaton and her partner, Vassal. And they have pioneered the transformation of these kind of buildings in France. So the first kind of knee-jerk reaction of the authorities was we demolish these buildings and we build new buildings. This firm of architects demonstrated that you could actually take an obsolescent building, the people could live in it, they didn't even have to leave it, you could expand it, improve it whilst they were living in it, and it would be cheaper than knocking the building down and building a new building. So this building, after their transformation, looks like this. And if we kind of home in detail on that, that's the facade looking obliquely of the building in the first image. And what they did is they added another layer. Of course, they upgraded the infrastructure within the main building itself, but very, very delicately so that everybody could still live there. So that then has this additional layer. So that from the inside, this was how it was before, and this is how it is now. So the thought was, what if the city commissions this firm of architects to do a pilot project on a building, and that is an experiment which the local architects can participate in. It's like a workshop, it's like a school, so empowered, they could then use their own professional expertise, use local materials, maybe create an industry for the materials that can transform the housing. So you would have new professional expertise and you would have a new industry. Because if I kind of go back to see that, you see that these are lightweight, industrialized materials, prefabricated. So there's a great potential there for industry and innovation. If we come to the energy issue, which is at the heart of climate change, then they're off to a great start. They've got more than half in nuclear, and they have a mixture of others. Unfortunately, they have a big red splodge, and that is coal. So, getting ahead of the game, can they plan for a future where they not only take out coal, but they take out the dependence on the centralized system. What do I mean by that? At the moment, you can hold a country to ransom by just blowing up its power plant, whatever the source of energy is, because it's centralized. And the grid is very vulnerable. 2.5 million Californians, as we know, are without electricity because the grid, the power lines, collapsed on top of trees, sparked fires, and everybody's running to buy autonomy in the form of diesel-driven generators. Not exactly good for the planet. So what, instead of the diesel-driven generator, you can create an industrial product. Now, it just so happens that this is a project. This is showing a nuclear battery, which was referred to earlier, a container's length 20 feet, which could generate 10 megawatts. Power a small community, a small town, or in the basement of one building in an entire Manhattan city block. And the Foundation's been working with Keynes, the Center for Advanced Nuclear Systems here, with Giacomo Bongiorno, who hopefully will be talking a little later and sharing from a real expert's insight the amazing potential for this as an industrial product. And here I cannot resist the temptation to try to separate prejudice, hysteria, and fantasy from the reality of mortality. And it's just worth looking at nuclear. If you take deaths per 1,000 terawatt hour, coal in China is 170,000 deaths. Coal average, 100,000. Oil, 36,000. Natural gas, 4,000. Even PVs, 440, down to 150 for wind. Nuclear almost disappears off the graph. It's 90, and that is taking every fatality from plants that were created at the birth of this energy generation, and by almost certainly are obsolete. So the potential for new generation. More people die in a day from coal inhalation than the entire Chernobyl accident. But we don't talk about it because we don't see it. And what is regarded as the ultimate downside is in actual fact the greatest advantage, and that is you have full control over the wastage from it, which is tiny, as opposed to the billions of tons of noxious gases which kill 10 million a year. That's another story. I'll move myself away from that. So what areas are we now looking at? The agriculture, the potential, as we've heard earlier, to industrialize that, to bring it into the city, urban farming, fresher food, more flavorful, more sustainable, liberating the countryside. In short, work in progress, very much about a process. Not surprisingly, perhaps unspoken, and a number of people have asked me, but how can you be working on a blueprint for the future when this city is under constant bombardment in the middle of a horrific war? And my answer to that is that as a child, I grew up in this. In 1943, I was probably 8 years old. I would wake up in the middle of the night in a bomb shelter. This kind of stuff was the essence, the horror of World War II. And it was in the height of World War II that the government instigated a blueprint, a master plan for the future of London, Greater London, and the nation beyond. It was called the Abercrombie Plan. This is an excerpt from it. And interestingly, just look at these little gloops. The idea was to bring forth the importance of the neighborhood. It was also about addressing all the issues which are familiar to us today: traffic congestion, improving housing, bringing back nature. And what are the lessons? I think there are a number of lessons. One of the lessons is that this was not a bureaucratic imposition. It didn't have the kind of consultation that we've been talking about on Kharkiv. But just like Zelensky and the mayor of Kharkiv, the leaders, the king and queen, lived throughout the Blitz. They didn't leave London. This was endorsed by them. You could buy it in every bookshop. It was 4 shillings. I've got a copy of it on my shelf in Martha's Vineyard. I look at it, even as an inspiration today. It went through all the schools. Everybody was immersed in this. This was not just something that would happen after the war. It was morally. It had an imperative. It had an encouragement for a belief in the future. What are the differences now from then? I think predominantly the principles are the same. They're enduring, they're timeless. But some of the differences, and the differences that bring the foundation together with the amazing work of the City Lab here, is the technology, the foresight to be able to use tools to explore some of these ideas and to quantify their effects socially, environmentally, and economically. So that is really what brings us together here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi to everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. And thank you, first of all, to the organizers of the summit to have a speech here. And a sincere special thanks to the Lord Norman Foster and the foundation team. They are doing incredible work for Kharkiv city and for whole Ukraine, not only for Kharkiv city. Because for today, we are only the one city who started the planning. And it's very important. Why? Because when we started that work, we not only feel that we are closer to the victory, but all our citizens feel the same. All our citizens every day asking the mayor whether the foundation is helping, whether they are with us. Because for them, the planning of the future in this nightmare that Ukraine now has is very, very important. It's extremely important, this support. And I want to thank to everybody, and I want to thank especially to the team of the foundation for this joint work. We have created a city lab in our city, and on the local level, we created a working group of the local architects, of the local historians, of the local experts who are working every day together with the foundation team. We are sharing the ideas. We are looking forward to the new projects. We jointly have summarized and decided this approach to the master planning. And this approach is now the best because the pilots project which were presented and which Lord Norman Foster showed us now are very important. And of course, this expertise that we will receive from the international experts and from the international architects and all the experts which are now working with us is extremely important. We are facing that first time. We never thought that in our country will be this nightmare that we are all facing today. And we do not know a lot of things, how to do better, how to create something new. And this Soviet time heritage are so annoying now, even more than it was before. Because we cannot react, we cannot respond now perfectly and well to all the challenges and all the disaster, we can say, what is now going on in our city especially. For today, in Kharkiv, more than 150,000 people are without a flat. So the residential buildings was damaged a lot, and the most, we can say. Of course, a lot of administration buildings, a lot of cultural heritage. That's why those all pilot projects, which were very carefully showed and which were carefully suggested to us, and our local architects and the mayor supported, were really, really examined after all the destructions and damages that we have in our city, to unite all the spheres and to have the pilot experience in all the spheres. And as Norman Foster said, our mayor was dreaming of the science park in Kharkiv. And it was the dream even before the war. And we were working on that. We were trying to get the place, we were doing, and when this all began and when this disaster began in our city, you know, now we are as a brave nation, as everybody say. We are not so brave, we are optimistic. As we are now saying, the war is a new opportunity to have something new in our city, fully new approach to the urban planning, and fully new master plan with the super great support of the best international experts that we have today. The foundation is doing a great work. I can say you honestly, I did not heard about any other cities that have started to plan. And it's very important, because even if the war will tomorrow end, we are not ready to rebuild. We are not ready to understand from what to start and how to do that. That's why the London's example is the best. They were ready. When the war finished, they were fully ready to start the rebuilding of their city. This is our goal, and I, one more time, just want to emphasize that the science park in our city is a tremendous project. It's the pilot project for whole country. It's not only for Kharkiv. We do not have in Ukraine such a space. The space where you can live, work, actively have a leisure time, and anything, the new innovations. This is something new, and we can be, and we will be, I assure, the pilot project for the whole our country. And as Kharkiv is we call it usually as the young city. And it's not because of the age of the city, because of the students. Every second person in Kharkiv is the student. We have more than 350,000 graduates each year, 36 universities and higher educational institutions. Today, they also suffering a lot because, of course, not all the students are staying. Of course, a lot of universities were destructed and damaged. But if we will be together as we are now, and we are honestly saying to you, working as a big, big family now, with the foundation, with the NARUP, with the super professors from Oxford University and from Harvard University, which are working on the economic vision, and thanks to the foundation again for their attraction. Because without the new economic vision after the war, we will not be able to rebuild the economy of the city and to attract people back. This is the main. Because without the people, there's no need for infrastructure. And this is our main idea, to create new, fully new, and to examine the mistakes that we have before, and to create fully new city, the city of the future. And when we were preparing our presentation, it is consists from 3 videos. The first video from our mayor to you all, and the second video is about our city for you to a bit understand how we look like and what the war have done to our city. And the third video is from our citizens, what they think about Kharkiv and how they respond now, how they see Kharkiv in the future. Thank you very much for this time.
Уважаемые участники саммита, приветствую вас из города-героя Харькова. Прежде всего, хочу поблагодарить организаторов и лично лорда Нормана Фостера за возможность выступить на столь масштабном и представительском мероприятии. Я знаю, что обычно на таких саммитах обсуждаются вопросы, связанные с устойчивым развитием громад и городов, повышением уровня комфорта и безопасности. Это именно те вопросы, над которыми мы работали в Харькове. Но сегодня повестка дня в корне изменилась. Как вы знаете, Российская Федерация совершила полномасштабное вторжение в Украину. Разрушено много городов и сел. Лишены крова миллионы людей. Сейчас перед украинской властью на первое место вышли совсем другие проблемы. Учитывая, что ракетные обстрелы и бомбардировки продолжаются практически каждый день. Тем не менее, даже в это тяжелое время мы не можем не думать о том, что нам необходимо сделать после нашей победы. Почти сразу после первых разрушений в городе мы начали строить планы послевоенного восстановления Харькова. На сегодня в той или иной степени в городе повреждено около 3500 многоэтажных жилых домов, сотни объектов инфраструктуры, школы, больницы, детские садики, магазины, подстанции, котельные и многое-многое другое. Все это необходимо будет отстроить. И не просто сделать так, как было раньше, а сделать намного лучше, комфортнее и, конечно же, безопаснее. Я очень рад, что в этом нам согласился помочь выдающийся архитектор современности, лорд Норман Фостер со своей командой. Сейчас мы вместе работаем над созданием нового генерального плана развития Харькова. Цель этого плана – сделать Харьков прогрессивным, передовым городом в сфере жилищно-коммунального хозяйства, транспорта, здравоохранения. Мы планируем построить в Харькове мощный индустриальный парк, который даст импульс развития промышленного производства, научного потенциала нашего города. Важно, что этот план может послужить пилотным проектом для других городов Украины. Знаю, что Норман Фостер предложил Массачусетскому технологическому университету сотрудничать, чтобы использовать их опыт в области анализа данных и передовые цифровые инструменты для решения сложных урбанистических задач. Мы будем рады любой помощи. И я очень ценю, что тема послевоенного восстановления украинских городов будет обсуждаться в первый день саммита. Верю, что это приведет к конкретным практическим результатам и поможет в достижении наших целей. Благодарю за внимание. Желаю вам плодотворной работы.
Our home doesn't end outside the apartment. The streets of our city are also our home, the city we love and create. At home, everything in its place. Your desk space, your mug, everything creates your comfort. Every little thing is important because you adjust it to your needs. The city works the same way. Every citizen of Kharkiv manifests in it, and the government hears their needs. Many progressive and innovative artistic and ecological projects grew rapidly and created comfort for the citizens. Over the past 5 years, the city has undergone significant infrastructural changes. Construction and reconstruction of boiler houses, thermal power plants, water and heating systems, construction of new and overhaul of existing bridges, expansion of transport highways. The attention to details and active work on development made Kharkiv one of the top 3 most comfortable cities in Ukraine. While getting rid of the Soviet heritage, Kharkiv created its own unique face. But the war suddenly broke into our home, and the destruction affected every area. Dwelling houses, kindergartens, schools, hospitals, infrastructure facilities, administrative buildings, public transport, cultural and architectural monuments were destroyed and damaged. We do not fear. Our road to the future was bombed and shelled, which caused great damage, but we didn't change our direction. Even under bombardments, we continued to work, rebuild, and live as the bravest, most loyal, and loving people we are. We want to revive our Kharkiv, taking into account all the old mistakes that became critical during the war. We want to pay attention to the reformatting of the road and transport infrastructure. This complex issue should be solved by utilizing large-scale projects of building ring roads, dual-purpose underground parking lots, tunnels, multi-level transport interchanges, roads with lines dedicated for modern urban transport. No less important and strategically necessary is the development of the subway network, as Kharkiv specialists did before the war. After all, the subway is the fastest public transport. During the war, the subway became a safe haven for many Kharkiv residents who hid within its walls from enemy shells for several months. The imperfections of the city's infrastructure need to be fixed. New heating networks and water supply systems must be constructed in those areas where it was unfortunately destroyed. Reconstruction and renovation of heat sources inside the city will make us independent of heat coming from outside. The city's water supply system warrantably pushes us to build new water intakes and water lines, to change the scheme of water supply to the city in order to make it more autonomous and protected from external factors. Based on all the improved infrastructure, we will be able to build new, comfortable residential areas with modern courtyards and create recreational areas equipped with modern interactive equipment, where every Kharkiv resident can spend time with benefit and pleasure. Special attention will be paid to the construction of bomb shelters. Kharkiv is a modern city that adheres to the concept of modern urbanism, which aims to unite green spaces in cities. It's not about park creation in our usual sense. We want to create nature inside the city, and the confirmation of this is the Green Frame project, the goal of which is to connect all park areas of the city into one network of green corridors with pedestrian and bicycle paths. Currently, the joint active work of the city with the support of United Nations Economic Commission for Europe is already underway on the creation of Kharkiv restoration concept and the updated master plan. The best international and Ukrainian experts have been involved, in particular the world-famous British architect Norman Foster, as well as the Norman Foster Foundation. Working groups have already been formed, which include Spanish and German specialists involved by Lord Foster, as well as our Kharkiv architects and urban planners. In the new and peaceful Kharkiv, we particularly want to pay attention to the IT sphere, industrial, high-tech parks, and industry. This is a chance to reconstruct large productions, to give them a second life. Ukraine is independent, and we want this independence to come to life in our urban and courageous city, the city that breathes with freedom. Now our freedom is in our spirit, and we want Kharkiv to function as freely as its residents think. We invite you to join in the development of a new city plan. After all, your experience, contribution, and participation are important. Become a part of Ukrainian courage. support the revival of Kharkiv city.
Мене звати Дмитро, я головний редактор медіа про Харків і культуру «Люк». Харків – це моє рідне.
Здравствуйте, я Ольга Нежурина, я харьковчанка, украинка.
My name is Lana. I'm from Ukraine, from Kharkiv, and now I'm in North South.
Привет, я Аня, я из города Харьков. Когда я закрываю глаза, мое первое воспоминание о Харькове – красивый и яркий парк года.
В городе Харькове мы очень любим его центральную улицу Сумскую, его центральную площадь, которая одна из самых больших площадей в Европе, его прекрасный парк Шевченко вместе с его новейшим зоопарком.
Мені подобається, що Харків – це ніби путівник по різних епохах, такий як пазл. І це також студентське місто, тут найбільша кількість вишів в Україні. І тому тут багато молоді, студентів.
Kharkiv is a modern, clean and development city in the east of Ukraine. I really like our architecture and how historical and modern buildings so exist.
I like our city for the fusion of different stuff and things like culture, science, parks, a lot of different architecture styles like
Харків завжди був видатним культурним центром, промисловим центром України, але я б назвав ще Харків і духовним центром.
У моєму місті мені подобається місто. Місто – то є люди, будівлі, парки, історія. Місто-герой, незламний та найгарніший у будь-який час та при будь-яких обставин.
Первое – это харьковский дух. Он пронизан наукой, искусством, культурой, образованием, всем тем, что связано с духовным развитием человека, без чего у человечества нет будущего.
Гордился студенческим городом, всякие научно-исследовательские институты были, и были прогрессивные во всех сферах деятельности.
Очень хочется, чтобы война не повлияла на количество студентов, на новые проекты, чтобы после окончания войны мы увидели такой же цветущий, такой же чистый, такой же родной, такой же светлый наш любимый город.
Если вы будете строить новые школы, то стройте их, пожалуйста, большими, красивыми, цветными, и чтобы там была куча площадок футбольных, теннисных, баскетбольных, чтобы они были такими же цветными, как в Италии.
Слава Украине.
Слава Украине!
Amazing. All right, I'd like to bring up now Manuel Sadoya. I just found out Manuel actually is an MIT alum, and he is an international advisor on innovation policy and science parks. So welcome, Manuel.
Good afternoon, professors and everyone. Thanks for having me. Following the deeply insightful presentation from Lord Foster, it is important to underline that science, technology, innovation, and education will be the key pillars from a forward-looking Kharkiv. This aspiration has been emphasized by the Mayor in countless occasions, and it has been also supported by many citizens and professionals across the city. Kharkiv already features quite a good number of actors to build this future. 13 national universities, diverse research institutes, and state-owned industrial corporations, a very dynamic IT sector, and some business incubators and private innovation projects. But unfortunately, this is not enough, because still Kharkiv has a weak innovation ecosystem, according to the conclusions of very relevant international institutions. No technological modernization in industry, state-owned enterprises with bureaucracy and corruption, very limited cooperation between academia and industry, have quite low R&D expenditure in relation to the GDP, an underdeveloped SME sector with no technological assistance, and finally, a poor performance of so-called science and technology parks. On top of this, and due to the war, we have seen the videos, some very prestigious institutions have been destroyed by the war, like you can see in the picture, the very famous, very prestigious Karasin University. However, this combination of positive and negative circumstances provides a unique opportunity for leapfrogging. To generate innovation, in addition to universities, research institutes, and companies, other mechanisms and linkages are needed to stimulate the interactions between them. If not, knowledge will remain at universities, resources will remain in companies, and innovation will not be generated. A possible solution for this would be, as indicated by the mayor of Kharkiv, to create a science park, which can become a very positive instrument, as it has been repeatedly demonstrated since 1951, after Frederick Terman set up the Stanford Research Park, as you know perfectly, the epicenter of Silicon Valley. But it is also true that traditional science parks have some associated drawbacks, like, for example, their isolation from urban centers or their scattered single building design that reduces synergies and interactions. In this situation, considering all these factors, a new urban typology addressing these deficiencies is proposed: the creation of a science neighborhood as an urban space integrated in the city that combines the benefits of a dense neighborhood, like mixed uses, public transportation, and urban synergies, with those of a science and technology park, innovative companies, universities, high-quality buildings and infrastructures, and good working environments, addressing all the already mentioned drawbacks. The science neighborhood would incorporate housing, services, public spaces, and a key element, the innovation engine, specifically designed to generate innovation at its maximum degree and to disseminate this innovation and prosperity to the rest of Kharkiv. Can you imagine an innovation engine integrated in the urban center of Kharkiv, with innovative buildings and architectural design, developing science and technology not only for high-tech companies, but to promote the technology-art interactions, cultural applications, creative industries, and applying state-of-the-art, but also proven technologies with innovative business models for improving agriculture productivity, sustainability, housing, energy, living conditions? This is what the innovation engine would bring for Kharkiv. In the context of the science neighborhood, with houses, restaurants, art galleries, parks, and so on, the innovation engine should be integrated by two different types of ingredients, what we could call the hardware and the software. And like in computers, both are absolutely essential. The hardware of the innovation engine should include plots of land, multi-tenant buildings with innovative design and high flexibility and interior modularity, shared facilities like auditorium, multipurpose spaces, restaurants and cafes, single-tenant buildings for universities, research institutes, or innovative companies, infrastructures like sustainable energy, transport services, and of course, state-of-the-art telecommunications, areas for growth and expansion to accommodate to the needs of the growing companies, and access to high-quality public spaces like parks, sport facilities, or plazas. But it is not enough with occupying buildings with companies, universities, and research institutes. To generate innovation at its maximum degree in the framework of the Kharkiv and Ukraine reality, it is necessary to eliminate barriers, to cross boundaries, to set up new actors and mechanisms, to create a neutral and visible ground for all, and an atmosphere and innovative dynamics that nowadays, there are not in the city. To achieve this, the software of the innovation engine should include innovation generation mechanisms, like, for example, promotion of entrepreneurship, setting up new applied research centers of university technology transfer units, R&D projects development supported by new public competitive funding, generating artistic and cultural technological innovation, and innovative social projects to improve people's lives in different areas. On the other hand, would be the provision of different types of services, like networking, education, information, events, internationalization, or intellectual property, for example. A very important issue would be the management of the innovation engine. I would recommend by a small team of highly skilled and dynamic professionals. And last but not least, in relation to finance, it would be very important to plan the innovation engine as a long-term, self-sustained business. So once these hardware and software activities are properly managed, the science neighborhood would be able to transform Kharkiv, thanks to the creation of a comfortable, smart, green, and vibrant neighborhood, the modernization of existing industrial fabric, a new and innovative high-tech industry, entrepreneurship promotion and competitive SMEs, employment creation, including high-skilled jobs, a new collaboration era between academia, industry, and government, the talent and investment attraction, which was so clearly explained and underlined in Ed Glaser and Ian Golding's paper, more fiscal revenue and available resources, and finally, making Kharkiv as a reference for Ukraine and the world. To finish up, in 1942, the Austrian economist Joseph Schumpeter, who is regarded as the father of the innovation theory, introduced his famous creative destruction concept as the driving force of innovation and economic growth. 80 years later, and it is very sad to say that as the result of a very destructive war, Kharkiv has the opportunity to demonstrate Schumpeter's theory once again, setting up a science neighborhood as a core element to recreate the city and its socio-economic development towards the future. And now, Diego, another member of the foundation team, will explain to you how this will be made a reality. Thank you very much.
Hello. So I'm Diego Lopez, architect at the Norman Foster Foundation, and today I have the opportunity to bring you one of the projects we are working at, the Kharkiv Master Plan, and specifically the pilot project of the Science Neighborhood. It all started with this request from the mayor of Kharkiv when he asked for, within the master plan, create a new and modern space for business and science center for a forward-looking city. When we think of a science park, we think of a space in which we generate innovation, but that's not always the truth. Sometimes it doesn't happen, and that's due to a number of reasons. For example, being isolated from urban centers, being scattered buildings around so that they reduce the interactions and synergies between them. But also, if we think, on the other hand, about neighborhoods, we think about spaces in which we foster social interaction, we get mixed uses, we also get access to public transportation, and we provide urban synergies between them. So this concept of having a science neighborhood for the city of Kharkiv aims to combine benefits of both dense neighborhoods and science parks. As we think this neighborhood will become then the innovation engine for the city of Kharkiv. As very well Manuel pointed out, we need to provide both hardware and software for it. The hardware will be everything that we're building, everything that is being physical, and we mean by that plots of land that are going to be used for the construction of the buildings, but also for its expansion in the future, central buildings, multi-tenant buildings, and all the other infrastructures needed for making this possible. But also we need to look carefully at the software in order to be a functioning innovation engine. So this software is everything that is not tangible but needs to be there. Everything like related to innovation mechanisms, local policies, management teams, and financial and business analysis and plans. Now that we are clear that we want to have a science neighborhood, we need to know where are we locating it. And for this challenge and for many other questions that we are facing while we are developing this master plan, we do it with locals. As very well Olga pointed out, we are becoming a family with regular meetings. And in this specific one, in this specific challenge that we are facing, we ask them to collate a number of potential sites for us to introduce the science neighborhood. They did it, and they, after a thorough analysis of all these sites, we concluded that these three ones that you see on the screen were the optimal ones. An aircraft factory north of the city, but very close to the city center. The Varavasova market, or the industrial greenfield that you see on the screen. We came, zoom in, and started looking closely to these sites, analyzing pros and cons, and we all concluded that the site number 3, Varavasova market, was providing a number of benefits that were making it the most adequate one for this science neighborhood we are proposing today. It has available land, not only for the construction, but also for the expansion of this neighborhood that we are presenting today. And it also is very close to public transportation as well, so it combines a lot of bonuses that make it ideal. If we have a closer look at the Varavasova market, we see that it's a huge footprint of 75 hectares. It's the biggest market in Europe and is the 15th biggest one in the world. It provides jobs to more than 90,000 people in its more than 50,000 trading spots. But the truth is that the reality of the Varavasova market now is like this. It's been destroyed due to war, bombarding, and shelling. It is true that it is tragic and a terrible problem that they're facing now, but this is becoming also an opportunity for us to start implementing the hardware that we were discussing before. We can create a smaller market, housing spaces, science labs, shops, leisure facilities, university buildings, TODs, and even green and public spaces on it. If we have a closer look to the area hatched in orange, we can identify this market. But if we have a view of the wider context, hatched in green, we can understand that there is at north of this site a natural reserve land that we plan then to extend throughout the riverbanks so that they can become true green corridors and blue corridors for the city of Kharkiv. In blue, you can find Hatched, the metro depot, one of the key infrastructures in terms of transportation for the city of Kharkiv, and it's there to stay. We're going to keep it in the science neighborhood we are proposing. Hatched in red, smaller buildings that were providing services to the bigger market that they are not needed anymore. The DAS red line is a metro line of the city of Kharkiv, connecting the city center with the neighborhood of Saltivka, one of the densest, not only in Kharkiv, but also in Europe, with more than 400,000 people living in it. We also even have one of the metro stations in the Baravasova market area. And also dashed in blue, you can find one of the communications arteries, the main arteries of the city of Kharkiv. All in all, we are accounting for around 140 hectares for the construction of this science neighborhood. We also need to look at the topology of the site, so we need to understand what are the lines that can define then the urban grid that we are going to be laying out and setting out on top of this site. So we can find some of them coming north to south and some of them coming west to east, like the riverbanks, the geometry of the metro depot that we referred to before, the communication artery, or even the metro line that we referred to in the beginning of this presentation as well. So all these can support then an urban grid that we can implement and also inform the sizes of the blocks. That can come also from research that we've done and then on other main capitals in Europe that you can see for these blocks, the numbers range between 70 and 120 meters. But it's not just about learning from the past. We also need to implement new ideas and look into the future, because in here we're going to be having businesses that are using the most advanced technologies, and we will be designing them also with the most advanced urban digital tools as we are seeing today. Everything is going to be designed as well with the highest standards in terms of sustainability and green energy production. So again, we need to start thinking of how are we going to be designing and constructing these buildings. And again, from the local architects, we got this statement when they said this is a unique opportunity for creating new exemplary areas of modern, low-rise neighborhood development. So we started looking at how this can be started to be laid out. We have a diagrammatic cross-section of the different functions divided in these multi-tenant buildings, so we can combine housing with shopping and leisure facilities, offices and science labs all together in order to create thriving streets that foster social interaction, but not only at the ground floor level, in all the entirety of the heights and different floors that we are providing here. And it will also integrate vegetation on top of these buildings as another request that came from the local architects, and that's naturally sustainable due to the weather conditions in Kharkiv. So all these ideas were condensed in this sketch that you see on the screen that was produced by Norman Foster and Ken Larson together in a workshop held last summer. So you see that they start laying out with colors and labeling the different functions of the hardware that we were referring to before, like market, housing, offices, shops and leisure facilities, the parks in green, the U-shape for the university, and the metro and TOD where the orange dot is. The idea is then to create a thriving community in a very strategic location next to the city center, but also connected to the other neighborhoods in the peripheral areas of Kharkiv. And it's about creating innovation, as we discussed before with Manuel, but it's not just innovation that is going to stay there, it's going to project to the other neighborhoods that are around it, and even beyond the city, so that it can become then a true blueprint for all the cities in Kharkiv. And the idea is to create a local and international talent magnet that will position again the city of Kharkiv in the front line of urbanism, technology, and innovation. We are designing a neighborhood that is around 40,000 people living in it, with around 36,000 people per square kilometer. If we put it in context with the local Beacon Hill here in Boston, it almost doubled the density of this neighborhood. But it's very similar to other successful examples in all the major capitals in Europe, like the district in Chambéry in Madrid, or the 11th district in Paris, or to put it in context with Saltivka, which we referred to before in other presentations as well. It is roughly the same number, but the truth is Saltivka is one major sleeping district. There's no other uses different than residences, but what we are proposing here is something very different. It's mixing all these different uses together in this new science neighborhood. And in order to do this, we have the help and support from the MIT team that they are building this interactive tool that will give us data, and we'll be able to create data-driven solutions, so we will have scientifically informed decisions in order to optimize the design process and come back to the city of Kharkiv and saying this is the best science neighborhood that we can provide. Thank you very much.
Norman, hi, good to see you. So Ken told me in the interest of time, go on stage, introduce yourself. So here I am. My name is Jacopo Bongiorno. I'm a professor in the Department of Nuclear Science and Engineering here at MIT. And today I want to tell you about the marriage of two technologies, nuclear batteries and advanced industrial production, which can potentially transform the way in which we produce, consume energy, as well as run our economy. But first, a big step back, and let's look at the big picture. If I were to run a survey in this room about what are the three most compelling challenges that we're facing as humankind, I'm pretty sure a vast majority would agree that it's what I put on this slide. So we are facing a crisis in climate change, both the mitigation and adaptation sides of it. We're facing major geopolitical instability and economic inequality. And the key to the solution of all these challenges is energy. Access to energy, abundant energy, can diffuse competition for resources and therefore diffuse geopolitical instability. The use of clean energy is going to displace a lot of emissions, which help obviously with climate change. And then access to energy or obviously also help with providing economic opportunities. So if you look at the history of the energy generation and use and go all the way back to, say, Roman times in my native country of Italy, the energy sources, in this case a water mill, and the energy users, in this case the production of flour and olive oil, were always co-located. That has always been the economically most efficient way to run production activities. Fast forward 1900 years, and at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, you see a similar phenomenon still, the emergence of clusters of production activities and therefore cities that go with it along water streams because of the access to hydropower. The problem with this traditional approach is that the energy resources were very constrained because you were basically forced to be next to a water stream. So in a way, you could look at the history of the past 200 years as far as energy is concerned as the evolution of a system that has become more interconnected and larger to basically access energy everywhere and anywhere and then use it elsewhere. The problem with this new approach is that you have energy generation and energy users that are geographically separated and static. They require massive transmission infrastructure. For the electric grid is transmission lines. For hydrocarbons is pipelines. Very high capital intensive equipment has low utilization factor because of high variability both in demand and intermittency in supply. If you think about the average utilization, for example, for solar and wind, or the backup that goes with it is usually pretty low. And then last but not least, these complex interconnected systems are almost inherently vulnerable to external perturbations. This could be either extreme events, and for example, here we get the occasional polar vortex which takes out the grid for a couple of days, or malicious attacks of terrorism or even war. So what is the solution? Well, I would propose that the solution is a dense and clean energy source coupled with modular industrial systems, and I'll tell you what those are in a minute, that are co-located but universally applicable. And therefore, you realize a system that is distributed but not interconnected. So it doesn't have the vulnerabilities that I just described. Okay, so there are sort of two players in this drama that I'm going to introduce one at a time. The first is the energy source with the right features, and that's what we call a nuclear battery. So what is a nuclear battery? Well, it's a small nuclear reactor, microreactor, let's say producing between 1 and 20 megawatts of heat and or electricity. If you're even vaguely familiar with traditional nuclear power, they tend to be much, much larger plants of the order of a gigawatt, and they tend to be connected to the grid. This is different. It is still carbon-free because that's the nature of nuclear. It does not require water for cooling, so again, it decouples you from proximity to bodies of water. It is a fully standardized reactor or system design. It is expected to be mass-produced in factories. Factories are high productivity environments as opposed to construction sites, which are typically lower productivity environments. It is transportable, as you can see in the image here, in 2 or 3, depending on the design, standard containers. And so it's literally has the potential to be a plug-and-play energy source. It could take of the order of days to weeks from the time these machines arrive to the site to the time the customers or the users actually start to get the energy that they need. For economic reasons, you cannot afford to have large cadre of operators on site, so they're being designed to be autonomous or semi-autonomous with remote monitoring, not necessarily remote control because of cybersecurity issues. And then interestingly, this being nuclear reactors, their energy density is very high. They can provide that energy and or electricity for say 5 to 10 years, again it depends on the design and the use case, without any refueling. At the end of that period, you do need to refuel them, and here comes the next sort of innovation. Instead of refueling them on site, you ship this nuclear battery to a central facility where it's opened up, defueled, refueled, refurbished, and then either sent back to the same site or sent to a different site. And part of the reasons why we call these batteries is because what we have in mind is AA, AAA, D batteries, which are all interchangeable. The customer doesn't care if you're getting unit A, B, or C, as long as it's compatible with their energy use there, it works. An implication of this off-site refueling is that there is no need for handling and storing radioactive material at the site. And again, this is certainly good for social acceptance. Nuclear energy tends to be very, very dense. And so here you see, or maybe you can't see, that little green rectangle on this slide is roughly the size of a 10 megawatt nuclear battery. And that's how it would compare to a nominal 10 megawatt either solar field or wind turbines. And then last but not least, there is a lot of excitement in the West, in particular in the United States, because unlike the larger plants for which sort of the center of gravity or the industry has really shifted towards East Asia, US suppliers are in the lead. So you might be familiar with some of these companies, Westinghouse, BWXT, X-Energy, et cetera. So that's the first technology. The second key technology that enables this potential transformation of the economy is what we call advanced industrial production. And so any process or production technology that can be miniaturized, modularized, and mobilized is what we refer to here as advanced industrial production. It allows for deployment in increments, and I will show you in a couple of slides what that does in terms of cash flow and economic viability. And once again, it has the potential to basically be a plug-and-play approach. Some examples are shown here with their more traditional, more monolithic counterparts. So the first one on the left there is a data center. The one on the very left is a traditional mega data centers. It might require hundreds of megawatts. It takes several years to build, and it costs several $100 million. And what you have immediately to the right of it is a modularized, containerized, and mobilized data centers, which of course does not have the same power, so you need to sort of stack them up and deploy them in increments. But it also requires a lot less energy to run, and it can be deployed quicker. Other examples that you see here are pharmaceutical facilities. Even agriculture can be containerized. It requires a lot of energy, again, so you need an energy source there. And then hydrogen, which is very important for basically decarbonizing the transportation system. So when you put these two technologies together, nuclear battery plus advanced industrial production, you have what I would call a potential game changer. The concept is shown here for a completely hypothetical site. We focus on states that are particularly suffering during this energy transition because they were heavily based on hydrocarbons, and now they're sort of losing that economic power. So this could be, for example, a site in Wyoming. There are a lot of mining sites, so you have access to raw materials. The idea here is to deploy one or more of these nuclear batteries at that site. And what do you do with it? Well, nuclear batteries produces electricity and heat, and you can use both sort of energy streams for useful things. With electricity, you can actually do electric mining, which would decarbonize the mining operation themselves. And with both heat and electricity, in this case, if you have an iron mine and you produce iron ore, you can actually produce steel with new processes like the molten oxide electrolysis and the direct current sintering. And so what you have now is a truly carbon-free steel in some form. It could be rods, it could be plates, but you don't stop there. You can co-locate at that site also manufacturing and assembly facilities, which would also be powered by the nuclear batteries. And then what you get at the other end of this process is the finished product. And so, as I'll show you in the next slide, the economic proposition or the economic value of that finished product is much higher than if you were to sell commodity steel to the market. The features of these systems are that you don't need grid or pipeline infrastructures. You have shortened markup chains because basically you have fewer middlemen that you have to pay along the process of going from raw material to finished product. It allows for incremental provisioning. I'll define what that means in the next slide, and I'll show you what it does, as I said, in terms of economic value. And finally, you can say with a straight face that the finished products coming out of this system are carbon-free because the whole system is powered by a carbon-free energy source. Okay, so this business of co-location and incremental provisioning, what do we mean by that? Well, we mean what I just described, that you co-locate energy source with advanced modular or advanced industrial production. But further, it also means that you do that in smaller increments. So instead of spending a lot of words here, let me show you this plot. So there are three curves here. The top curve shows a nominal loading factor for a particular alloy of steel. In this case, actually, just to prove the point, we pick something that is essentially a commodity. And so the margins in principle would not be particularly high. This sells for about $800 per ton. So that top curve, the gray curve, shows a ramp up, then steady, then there is maybe some economic crisis, so the demand softens a little bit, and then you go back up again. And then the other two curves compare the cash flow for the two approaches that I described. One, this co-location of nuclear batteries with advanced modular production. And then the other one, the more traditional, where you deploy a larger plant up front, anticipating a certain capacity or a certain demand over the course of the years, and then try to recover that investment over the years. And so the other, on the x-axis here, I forgot to say, but what you have here is time, okay, in years. So focus first on the orange curve, which is at the bottom. Not surprisingly, you have a big investment up front, and so your cash flow becomes negative very quickly. So you're accumulating debt, essentially. Then you start to make stuff and selling it to the market, so it goes up a little bit. But there is that dip in demand because some economic crisis has occurred, and so you go down again. And then finally, if the demand is stable, you go up and you reemerge and become cash positive after 14, 15 years, actually. I can't really, 15 or 16 years. Now, compare that to blue, which is the approach that we are advocating for. And basically, you can see that the cash flow is always positive. Now, in reality, if I were to zoom on year one of that project, you would see that at the very first few months, it would go negative because, of course, you need to put up some capital at the very beginning, even for that smaller system. So needless to say, this is quite attractive from an economic point of view. I just shown you that example with iron and finished steel products, but literally, you could apply this trick or you could play this trick in every sector of the economy. And the timeline that you see there on the right simply indicates what applications, in our judgment, are going to go first, because either your competition is very expensive, or there is a compelling need for this new approach that the traditional approach doesn't satisfy. So things like military bases, microgrids, we just talked about mining sites, indoor aquaculture, farming, data centers, and the list goes on. You could do district heating, you could do flood protection, running pumps for coastal communities. A little bit more futuristic, you could power space bases, even provide propulsion to ships. E-vehicle charging stations, biofuels. Here you're starting to get into more commodity-like markets, and therefore probably it's not where you want to start. You're going to go there a little bit later. Why is this important? Well, if you're strictly thinking about climate change and displacing emissions, there is a disproportionate amount of interest at the moment in decarbonizing the grid. Well, guess what? The grid, once it's perfectly decarbonized, it's only 25% of the emissions. Now, I'm perfectly aware a lot of people think that we can electrify the hell out of everything, but a lot of sectors cannot be electrified. It's never going to be either feasible technically or economically attractive. And so this is the value proposition here. You could actually apply this approach across every sector of the economy. So I'm going to leave you with this quote. The challenges are massive, but I love this quote. This is very optimistic. So, you know, your future has not been written yet. no one says your future is whatever you make it, so make it a good one. And you probably recognize this is not a philosopher or a writer, but it's dear old Doc Brown from Back to the Future, which brings me back to my childhood. So with that, I guess we're on to the next speaker. So.
We're going to talk a little bit about what we think of as extended intelligence. And the first part of the program, if we could get the first video up, here we go. The first part of the program, we quickly showed these metrics in the radar plot. We have many different ways of looking at it. We mostly focused on the environmental, not so much on the economic or the social. These two guys have taken a lead in putting much of this together. So maybe start with Ronan. What is interesting about our economic metrics here?
Well, it depends a little bit the kind of context that we're working with, but a lot of places that we're working with, they're trying to create a district that's really innovative. Trying to maybe replicate something like the success of somewhere like Kendall Square. And so, we know a little bit about the kinds of ingredients that are necessary for innovation. So you need things like companies investing in R&D, you need the presence of a world-class university, you need diverse range of skills and abilities, and then facilitating interaction between those diverse sets of people. And so we develop different kinds of metrics to kind of indicate those various aspects. But then, other areas, innovation is kind of a nice to have, but it's not necessarily top of mind. Some places are more looking at kind of more basic measures of economic success. They just want to have kind of attainable jobs that can supply a living wage. So we kind of have to have more other measures that are more related to those kind of basic aspects of economic success. So it depends a little bit on the context.
Yeah. And so Luis here, we have a different radar plot. It's proximity, density, diversity. These are with respect more to the physical dimensions of an area. What do you think is most important about those metrics?
Well, first of all, I think it's very important to show these two radars because we are connected, the traditional economic, environmental, and social indicators with the physical environment through the density, proximity, and diversity. If you ask me about the social indicators, probably the one that I love the most is well-being. Why? Because it's messy, it's super difficult to calculate, and there is a lot of quantitative and qualitative information, and it's very related to the local situation. So, yeah, I think that's one of the indicators that are much interesting for me. I don't know if you want me to...
Well, you also see innovation potential.
Oh, yeah.
So how do we calculate innovation potential? It seems very murky.
Oh yeah, that's another messy one. I see, Kent, that you like getting into the difficult ones. So right now, there are different ways. We have Christian, that he was a PhD student working on innovation in the country level, and then we reduce it into we kind of have a version for the district level where we were looking for a diversity of people sharing ideas, but also places where they were sharing ideas. For instance, Andorra, that is, we have people from Andorra here, probably they have the same diversity than Kendall Square, but the interaction between the diversity in Andorra is a little bit different because they have tourists. In Kendall Square, you have the same diversity, but you have the institutions and the places to have that interaction.
Right, and it's also the amount of time that people have opportunity to interact. A science park might be 9 to 5, but a science neighborhood could be 24/7.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Let's look at this. So this is our Cityscope model of Kharkiv. Now, we don't really think of this as a master plan. It really is kind of an extended intelligence platform. But what does extended intelligence mean to you?
I mean, for me, it's kind of just letting the humans do what they're good at and letting the machine kind of augment that intelligence by doing the things that they're good at. I mean, probably the next slide kind of highlights this a little bit more as well, but the humans can kind of make the major design decisions, but then there are certain aspects of the design that are a little more intricate, where there's a lot of different variables involved, and human intuition is kind of, we don't have great intuitions for the difference between whether this is a 5-story building or a 6-story building and what's optimal. So we kind of use we use the combination of the human intelligence augmented by the machine intelligence to kind of fine-tune the decisions of the designers and the outcomes of the traditional design process.
And Luis, in this video, I think it'll play in a second, there you can see the radar plot, and it's updating in real time as people are making changes. So what is that responding to that the humans are doing?
Well, in this case, something that is very important is that we don't have like fixed indicators. Each project has their own challenge, and we have to build different indicators depending on the context. Here, this is a placeholder for Kharkiv. So that radar actually is not like a fully functional kind of radar. That's the whole purpose of this collaboration, not trying to get the data, try to get the unlikely partners around the table, the industry, the academia, the government, and the citizens making decisions. So this is just a first step, a strawman proposal, and in this case, this radar, again, the other ones, you could see that they had much information because we had data.
All right, last video. Okay, so this is a digital model, it's not a physical model. And Ronan, you built this model. Explain what you are manipulating here.
Yeah, so this is where the outcome of either like a traditional planning process or even a process facilitated by something like a cityscope would produce kind of basic design parameters, like where does residential go, where do different industries go. But then when you want to kind of fine-tune these kind of intricate details, you can use some kind of a generative or optimization model, which kind of takes all of those decisions from the people as parameters to work within. So the heights need to be between this and this, and you need to have this number of people employed there, and so on. And here there's restrictions on land uses in different areas, but then the model can kind of optimize within those parameters for some kind of well-defined objective. And in this case, it's just objective. It's maximizing for proximity between homes, workplaces, and amenities, but this could be optimizing for anything like CO2 emissions.
So in other words, as people are making changes to those sliders in this case, you are programming it to keep the live-work relationship in harmony as well as the amenities.
Yeah, so
in that sense, it's generative because anything they do achieves that kind of harmony.
Right. So it's always trying to keep those things in balance, and then you're just kind of tuning the parameters that it has to operate within.
Right. So in this case, this is a little more detailed model, presumably that it would come later in the process. And now you see the hint of, some texture and materials. This is all AI generated. And so, Luis, what do you think is the potential of this?
I don't know, Kent. This is your thing.
Well, okay. So, these AI tools are amazing. They surprise you, they delight you, but they're not connected to a model like this yet. I mean, they're really disconnected. They're text-based. So what's beautiful about it potentially is that people in Kharkiv, for example, could express verbally what their vision of a streetscape could be, in terms of the elements that they interact with. But then what is generated ultimately should be connected to these three-dimensional models, and you bring together AI and generative tools and all the metrics. We're a long ways from that, but I think these tools will transform architecture and urban planning. I think we're just beginning to see the potential. I think it could go either way. It could make it much easier to do terrible work, or it could empower creative people to go much farther and to produce more responsive work. So we'll see. All right, that was fast. We're out of time. All right, thank you. Okay. All right, I'd like to introduce Ed Glazier. He is that other school in town down the street. He's head of the economics department at Harvard. And Ed wrote one of the most influential books on cities for a general audience, The Triumph of the City. So he's an old friend. Welcome.
Thank you, Ken. It's wonderful to be here, and I will say it's been a tremendous honor to be part of the Norman Foster team that's been thinking about rebuilding Kharkiv. This represents my take on a joint project. There's a paper that exists together with Ian Golden of Oxford, and we're thinking about the economic infrastructure that connects with, that gives sinews to the physical plan that Norman is envisioning. At our heart of our plan is a recognition that the real city is actually made up of flesh and blood, not concrete and steel, and that cities rise or fall based on their human capital. I'm just showing you two figures that give you a sense of that. One shows you the relationship between share of the population with a college degree and earnings across American metropolitan areas. This is not just the fact that your skills make you more productive, make you wealthier. It's the fact that the skills of the people around you make you more productive. It's what economists call human capital externalities. The fact that as the share of adults in your metropolitan area with a college degree goes up by 10%, your earnings also go up by 10%, holding your years of schooling constant. Skills are vital for the rebuilding of Kharkiv. The other graph shows you the relationship between math skills and earnings across countries. Now, the rise of Zoom does not in any sense mean an end to face-to-face contact, right? Anyone who is in any part of the sort of university world knows that the ability to get back and meet once again was crucial to rebooting everything that our universities do. But it does mean that talent is more mobile than ever. And it does mean that cities need to work harder to retain and attract that talent. We're pushing for 5 interconnected strategies, all of which weave around the physical master plan. First, and most importantly, you heard Kent talk about it, and is to think about the universities that have so long been crucial to the strength of Kharkiv, and then thinking what you can build that wraps around that. And this is very much not a university cluster in a traditional sense which goes to bed at night, but just as you heard Ken say, it's a research community. It's a community of people who are connected together. The physical city as a talent magnet, empowering entrepreneurship with one-stop permitting and regulatory reform, a Kharkiv that is green, both in terms of how people live there, but also in terms of what it creates. Kharkiv is at the center of an incredible agricultural region. There's no reason it cannot be an engine of environmental innovations that make agriculture in Ukraine greener. And finally, strengthening the institutions that will encourage external investors to trust Kharkiv. So, a couple of simple points. One of which is, we're here at MIT, which is particularly appropriate, right? This is one of the 2 great clusters of technological innovation in the greater Boston region. The other one is, of course, along Route 28, which is also really MIT's fault too, because that cluster owes its life to Vannevar Bush and Raytheon and the move out away from Cambridge 100 years ago. But these 2 great clusters are the ones that actually have driven innovation in Boston for the past 50 or 60 years and driven the reinvention of this once dying industrial city into a capital of the information age. There is no reason why the universities of Kharkiv, which are a rich intellectual ecosystem, cannot serve exactly the same purpose. Secondly, if we think about the arc over the past 75 years, increasingly talent has been drawn to places where they want to live, not just to places where they happen to be productive in the short run. In the 18th century, Dr. Samuel Johnson famously opined that when a man is tired of London, he is tired of life. He was not talking about London's wages. He was talking about the joys of living in London, which are there now as they were before. We have seen those joys become ever more important, sometimes for the good, attracting people throughout the world to London, sometimes for the bad. And you can see this this is median house price to median income ratio across England. And in some parts of the north of England, that number is 3. In much of the area around London, that number is comfortably over 10, right? Those high prices relative to England reflect the fact that people actually want to be there, even if they aren't earning enough to pay for the housing. Now, throughout the world, aspects of living in a consumer city, aspects of living in a place that delivers pleasure, that delivers joy, right, show up again and again. We think of a city like Bangalore, magnet of talent, full of incredible Indian entrepreneurs, incredible Indian software engineers, and yet it's a city that is disconnected, in which campuses occur separately. Like this is the Mindtree campus, in and of itself an enormously pleasant place on its own, but one that is fundamentally severed off from much of the rest of urban life. That can't be the right vision for Kharkiv. Instead, mobility has to play a crucial role in this, and I just want to sort of give two traditional economist pegs for this, one of which is you always want institutions that wrap around the infrastructure, partially to manage that infrastructure, but also to make sure that people don't overuse the roads. Singapore has had congestion pricing for almost 50 years, right? It's the second densest country on the planet, and its roads move smoothly because you charge drivers for the social cost of their action. Right? You need things like that to make sure that drivers don't take over the world. Buses. There's much to love about the flexibility of buses. This is the Transmilenio in Bogota, right? There's an old joke that 50 years of transportation economics at Harvard can be boiled down to 4 words: bus good, train bad, right? In a world of electric buses, that's even easier to believe in. But part of the beauty of buses are they're flexible. And so, using buses to wrap around existing metro systems. Of course, the metro system in Kharkiv has been not just a source of mobility, it's been a source of literal protection from attack. It's been vital. Human capital is not just about the stuff we learn in schools, it's the stuff that we learn on the city streets. It's what the great English economist Alfred Marshall was talking about when he wrote that in dense clusters, the mysteries of the trade become no mystery, but are, as it were, in the air, right? I know of no mystery that is more important than the talent and imagination to become an entrepreneur. 50 years ago, the economist Benjamin Chinitz was comparing New York and Pittsburgh and noting that New York was more resilient than Pittsburgh was even then. He argued that this was a reflection of New York's industrial DNA, which lie in the garment industry, an industry with very few barriers to entry, with no returns to scale, with anyone with a good idea and a couple of sewing machines could get started. And so it was a mother of entrepreneurship, and those entrepreneurs went on to form movie studios. They went on to build skyscrapers. They went on to form investment banks, right? Because entrepreneurial human capital is fungible. By contrast, Pittsburgh had U.S. Steel. U.S. Steel trained company men, and they were great at logistics in the short run and terrible at figuring out how to reinvent Pittsburgh when things went wrong. Right? It is amazing how bad our measures of entrepreneurship are, and yet we still do remarkable well at predicting urban success and urban resilience. This is just average establishment size. Do you have a lot of big firms and do you have a lot of small firms? The metropolitan areas with the biggest firms, those are 5, had tiny employment growth over the last 30 years. The ones with lots of little firms had big employment growth. Right? Small firms, not big giants, are the future, right? Because they have entrepreneurial human capital. Luckily, Kharkiv is full of entrepreneurial human capital. There's a rich technological ecosystem of ground-up people, and that needs to be nourished and enabled. There are smart institutional things that can be done on this, making sure that permitting doesn't get in the way, making sure that you have a government that's there to help rather than to harm. Greening Kharkiv, right? And I just have 2 images here. One, of course, is bikes, right? These are actually Kendall Square bikes, right? And Kent has thought a great deal about sort of greening transportation within the city. But also thinking about how to connect into the EU's research funding programs that actually involve funding innovation in things like electric tractors, which is what this is an image of, or far more massive innovations that involve the greening of agriculture and the greening of industry. Remember, many of the tanks that beat the Germans on the Eastern Front in World War II were manufactured in Kharkiv. This is a map of mine from research I did 10 years ago. This looks at carbon emissions associated with living in different parts of Boston, right? The key point is the places that look brown, meaning central city, meaning here, are in fact green, and the places that look green are brown. And the reason for this is just the much shorter travel distances that are involved with people who live in dense, compact areas, and the much smaller living areas. Right, than just, especially when you're in a place with a difficult climate, as Kharkiv has, right? More compact living spaces mean much less energy is needed to either cool or heat the house when you have difficult seasons. Finally, these are Ukraine's ratings on the World Bank's doing business indicators pre-2020. These are not terrible, right? Dealing with construction permits, in fact, Ukraine is very good. It's 20th in the world in this. Some of these things, like resolving insolvency, Ukraine is pretty bad. All of these areas are ones in which improvements need to be made, right? Because we need to make sure that people are ready to rebuild, ready to move again. And one thing I think that we push on the report that's worth thinking about is, can the EU do something like offer insurance against future conflict for external investors as being something that's particularly valuable to think of? Last, I just want to end on these images. Norman took you to London in 1942. I want to take you back there, maybe a couple of years after that. In those years, this image of St. Paul's amidst the rubble was a symbol of hope, architectural beauty, maybe even a little faith, amidst the inhumanity of World War II. For me, the universities of Kharkiv, standing similarly among the rubble, are similar symbols of reason, of knowledge, and of hope amidst the inhumanity today. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Diana. I'm a Ukrainian citizen who was born and raised in Kharkiv. Due to the Russian military aggression, Ukraine has been destroyed by the constant bombardment and shelling. Many of Ukrainian cities were destroyed and will need to be rebuilt. This short video is a collection of Kharkiv citizens sharing their thoughts on the future of their city.
Мрію, що вдасться вирішити проблему заторів та місць для паркування. Але мені здається, що у сучасному місті має бути сучасний транспорт. Та якщо у Харкові буде сучасний, зручний транспорт, який ходить за розкладом, може і заторів поменше, тому що потреба у приватному транспорті буде менше.
Меня зовут Василий, я военнослужащий, я харьковчанин. Я хочу, чтобы после войны в Харькове было больше бомбоубежищ для безопасности. Также хочу, чтобы было очень много спортивних площадок, велодорожок.
Для мене дуже важливо зберегти в Харкові ту первісність і можливість, наприклад, робити якісь такі прості речі, там ходити по газонам, сидіти біля ставків. Це є дуже, дуже важливим зберегти якусь таку свободу на такому простому рівні.
В майбутньому я дуже хотіла би бачити в архітектурі міста гармонійне поєднання стародавніх будівель з сучасними архитектурными стилями.
Мне бы хотелось видеть Харьков как город уюта, молодежи и современности. Позади меня находится моя школа, которая была разрушена российской ракетой. В будущем мне бы хотелось видеть в моем городе новые, современные и безопасные учебные заведения.
Хочеться, щоб реставрували ті надбання української культури, наприклад, український модерн, які ще, маю надію, збереглися в Харкові. Реставрувати їх треба обов'язково. І головне, щоб місто було зручним для мешканців, спілкуванням, пересування повинно бути зручним, комфортним для кожної людини і особливо для людей з особливими потребами, бо це дуже важливо, і цього дуже не вистачає.
И отстроить хорошие общежития, такие современные, ну, вместо разбомбленных. Да. Вот. И чтобы у нас молодежь никуда не уезжала, да, куда-то в другие города. Да. Вот. У нас очень хорошо студенчество развито. И, ну, ясно, что и отстроить все школы, университеты, институты, училища. Вот. И хорошо современные, да?
Да, да.
Особливо я полюбляю харківські парки, тому що, на мою думку, вони дійсно найкращі в Україні та взагалі просто еталонні, тому у відновленому місті мені б, я думаю, хотілося б ще більше таких місць для прогулянок, та, тому що вони дійсно нереальні.
Перше, це нова система наземного громадського транспорту. Можливо, це міг би бути швидкісний трамвай, який би з'єднував всі райони міста з центром. Також вважаю важливим передивитися радянську систему промисловості і все ж таки вивести за межі великих міст заводи, фабрики, бо це завдає велику шкоду і загальному вигляду міста, і це шкодить повітрю, і це заводи утворюють багато шумів.
Хотілося б бачити побільше сучасних об'єктів
і, звичайно, об'єктів, які б могли забезпечити безпеку наших громадян.
As a citizen of Kharkiv, I believe that commuting patterns should be reconsidered. Currently, people are not feeling comfortable with using public transport, but a change in the system might create a shift in this attitude, leading to positive environmental impact. Additionally, Kharkiv needs more hubs or clusters where people can gather and generate ideas so that the city can be a home for collaboration and progress. Finally, we should focus much more on accessibility so that people with disabilities could also benefit from these improvements to the city. I hope this video was insightful and gave you an overview of what Kharkiv citizens are hoping for. Thank you for your time and support. Slava Ukraini!
By the way, you met Diana here. Diana, stand up. So she put all that together. I met Diana a few weeks ago. She came by the lab with an old friend of the lab, Megan Smith, who was, by the way, CTO of the U.S. under Obama. I don't know how you met her. And I said to Diana, when I found out she was from Kharkiv, I said, can you help us get more voices from artists, from old people, young people, from your classmates, from people who are in business, and she nailed it, so thank you. So Norman, what should we take away from today?
I think an extraordinary consensus. It started with the senator, and it weaves through individuals with extraordinary diverse backgrounds. So Manuel, who comes out of a background of innovation policies, buildings. He was responsible for creating science parks in the past, consultant to governments, echoing the same sentiments as retirees, young kids at school, hearing Ed Glazer, Jacopo Bongiorno, all coming from so many different backgrounds. And if you were trying to just identify common denominators, there were no dissenting voices. In other words, you weren't hearing somebody saying, my vision of Kharkiv is that I'll be able to get on an expressway and I'll go right out into the countryside there and I'll have my own big garden. You weren't hearing that. Everything that you were hearing was about the longevity, the comfort, the creativity, the sociability of the city, and the desire for neighborhoods, for social contact, for improving the quality of urban life, and doing it cleanly and with fun and with joy. So for me, if you ask for my takeaway, it's an extraordinary convergence of opinions from so many different backgrounds.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
And yours?
Well, no, I think exactly the same thing, and I do believe that there is tremendous potential, something we've been trying to do, to bring together people with deep experience and practice like you, together with the kinds of technology and innovation that hopefully we're developing here at MIT, and particularly in our group at the Media Lab. And I really look forward to seeing where this connection could lead.
I think the real challenge is how we make the connection with those who can empower. If we're the catalyst, if in Bucky's words, we're the trim tab, we're the small control surface which can move much larger forces. So somehow we have to unlock the studies which are funded by a generosity on the part of individuals like Ed Glazer, Manuel, the foundation, Arabs, and so on. It has to gather the momentum of serious capital to expedite it. And that's a metaphor, I guess, for the war itself.
Exactly. Yeah, it definitely needs to bring together the best of industry, the best of academia,
banking, funds, European funds,
politics,
international, yes,
public policy. That all has to come together, and it's quite a challenge. But I think in this room, I think there's a
step
commitment.
along the way.
Yeah. So, well, which brings me to the last question, and then we'll break, and we have a reception. What's the next step for you?
To push it over the edge to get a bigger momentum and serious funding to expedite this process.
Absolutely. All right, so we need all of your help. Thank you all. I think it was a great day. Stay seated because we have another Gabby video, and then it's short, and then we'll have a reception out there. Thank you all for coming.